My name is Jonathon Lookadoo, and I am an assistant professor at the Presbyterian University and Theological Seminary in Seoul, South Korea.
Dr. Jonathon Lookadoo. Jonathan, great to see you. Thanks for being with us today on Exegetically Speaking.
Thank you very much for having me on, David. I appreciate the invitation.
All right, we're talking about exegesis today. We're going to be looking at a text outside the New Testament. But before we do that, how did you get started reading Greek?
So I got started reading Greek at Oklahoma Baptist University. I went there to kind of study religion, which at the time was broadly speaking, it was largely Christian focused. And I got really interested in biblical studies. And so I took a Greek course my sophomore year of college and loved it. I had the chance to take five total Greek courses while I was there. So 5 semesters of Greek.
And that's at undergraduate level.
Undergraduate, yeah. So I was grateful for that linguistic focus to the program. I took some Hebrew as well, but I haven't maintained that quite as strong, I'm afraid. I need to do
So what happened?
To do a little work.
You went to seminary after that.
I did go to seminary and was able, so Beeson Divinity School was where I went to seminary, and they also had a good language program, a lot of emphasis on reading in Greek and in Hebrew. And so I had 4 more semesters of Greek during my MDiv course. And so I'm really grateful for all of those people who taught me to read, because it's proved to be a very rewarding skill to have. It's allowed me to read not only the New Testament, but also other texts outside of the New Testament. And,
well, you got your PhD at the University of Otago, which is in New Zealand. So you went to the other side of the world from where you were into such a beautiful country. Did you get? You started working on your thesis and such. Did you use your Greek a lot when you were writing?
I did use my Greek a lot. Yeah. I tried to keep engaging the texts in Greek whenever possible. During my more research-focused moments, I found it sometimes helpful not to allow myself to look at a translation, to sort of put all translations to the side. Of course, sometimes translations are quite useful, so I would bring them back in and utilize them whenever I could too. So.
Well, we have all sorts of great tools today and such. And now you've written a book called The Christology of Ignatius of Antioch. It's in a series I edit with Mike Bird and Scott Hauer called Studies in Early Christology. Great book. But so we're going to talk about Ignatius today, who was a very prominent Christian in the early part of the 2nd century. I'll let other people find out about who Ignatius is, but we're going to talk about his letter to the Philadelphians, which is one of 7 letters that he wrote on his way to martyrdom in the city of Rome. So set up what's going on in this particular letter, and what are we getting ready to read?
Yeah, so one of the things that Ignatius does in this letter is to tell us, to tell the Philadelphians, to recount for the Philadelphians and also for us, about a conflict that he seems to have had while he stayed there. It seems that there was a dispute about some of the things that Ignatius said, and also about how he knew them. And so in this passage that we're about to read, Ignatius talks about how he knew the things that were going on in that city, and perhaps some of the divisions that were going on in that city. Ignatius says that he knew them from the Spirit, the Holy Spirit.
So no human being sort of said, "Hey, there's really trouble over in Philadelphia," and such. Which is a city. I mean, this is not the American city, Philadelphia, but a city on the western coast of what is modern day Turkey, but is very prominent early Christian church.
Yes,
all right, so he has some knowledge. So take us into the passage. Read the passage for us in English, and then we're going to kind of dive into and dissect a little bit of part of this verse. Is Philadelphians chapter 7, verse 1 in Ignatius's letter.
Sure, yeah. So passage that I'm reading is Philadelphians 7:1, Ignatius Philadelphians 7:1, and I'll be reading from the translation by Alistair Stewart. And Ignatius writes, "For even if some people desired to deceive me in the flesh, the Spirit, which is of God, is not deceived, for it knows whence it came and where it is going, and it exposes what is hidden. Amongst you I cried out, I spoke with a great voice, the voice of God. Give mind to the bishop and to the presbytery and to the deacons."
And that's a theme that you see running throughout a lot of his letters. Pay attention to the bishops and the deacons and the church leaders. So what part of the letter, what part of the exegesis here are you really interested in today?
Yeah, so I'm really interested in the claim that Ignatius makes about the Spirit, that the Spirit is not deceived because it's from God. And then he says, "For it knows whence it came and where it is going." And the whence it came and where it is going language I find really intriguing because the same 5 Greek words, pathen erketai kai puhupage, are used in John 3:8 in a similar way.
Now, John 3:8 is where Jesus is talking to Nicodemus or Nicodemus and is talking about the Spirit, talking about the same thing, right?
That's right. Yeah. So there, Jesus is also talking about the Spirit. It's one of those passages that's a little bit tricky to translate into English because the Greek word pneuma, spirit, can also mean wind or breath. But in John 3:8, just reading from the NRSV, Jesus says, "The wind blows where it chooses, and you hear the sound of it, but you do not know where it comes from or where it goes. So it is with everyone who is born of the Spirit." So what the NRSV translates as "where it comes from" or "where it goes," those words are again pathen erketai kai puhupage. So John uses those words, and Ignatius likewise pulls from those words.
So, in your thought, then, is he aware of John's gospel, or a tradition maybe that it sort of ends up being in John's gospel?
I think that's the simplest explanation. Yeah, this passage I think is the best example. We could perhaps look at some others if we had more time, or if your listeners have more time to look things up. But yeah, I think this is the strongest example where we see Ignatius as someone who most likely knows the Gospel of John or some similar document or tradition, that there is a link between Ignatius and John at this point.
And whereas some translations say the wind blows where, it's clear that Ignatius here in his letter is talking about the Spirit not being deceived because it has come from God, right? And
That's correct.
The Spirit that has told him about sort of the situation on the ground there in Philadelphia is the same Spirit that we cannot fully comprehend, and the Spirit moves at its own pace and its own direction.
That's right. Yeah. So Ignatius emphasizes exactly like he said, the Spirit's freedom, whereas Jesus in the Gospel of John is, in that statement, kind of emphasizing the limitations of human knowledge. But perhaps these passages might work together in some ways.
That's one of the things I like about intertextuality, when you have these two texts that are similar, how one could inform the other. And it can go both ways, right, in some ways. But a part of exegesis is understanding not only the text before you, but all the sources maybe that have fed into that text and influenced that text, whether that be coming from the Old Testament, maybe in this case a gospel, or a letter, like letter of 1 Corinthians, something like that. But that's a great lesson in exegesis. Thanks today for being with us, Jonathon Lookadoo, in Exegetically Speaking.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, David. I've really enjoyed this.
Thanks. If you learned too much today and your head is hurting, there is one sure cure. That is to share this podcast with a friend. If you've never visited Wheaton College, I hope you'll make plans to do so. We have a wonderful campus all year round. And if biblical languages are your fancy, check out the MA and the BA program at Wheaton College. You can go to wheaton.edu, look for modern and classical languages. Get started today. This is the day you want to do it, right? If you have questions or comments, if you just want to be in touch, please email us at exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. That's exegetically.speaking@wheaton.edu. Thanks to all those who make this podcast possible. You know who you are. Until next time, thanks for listening.